You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to episode 414 of Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I'm your host, the aforementioned Mighty Blue, and we've got another great show for you today. First up, we've got Jessie Gehner, or the deliciously named Twisted Sister. Jessie was suggested to me by Lynn Savino as the woman who led the hike of the Virginia Triple Crown that Lynn and her fellow medical practitioners attended last year. Lynn was on the show a few months back and put me on to Jessie. Jessie spearheads the Wilderness Medicine Fellowship at her hospital in Roanoke, and she has such varied experiences that I wanted to introduce you to her. Jessie will be on in a moment. Then, at last, we catch up with the very blue-haired Jessica Lang-Wright for her debrief on her completed thru hike that she finished just before Christmas. I caught Jessica in a pensive mood, I suppose, but she's always interesting to interview, and I'm sure you'll get a kick out of her after Jessie. Just before we meet Jessie, I wanted to let you all know that the news I was intending to share a few weeks back didn't materialise, so there is no news. Let's meet Jessie now. She was outside her home leaning on a tree with very spotty internet. In fact, she went quiet on me several times, but I think I've managed to pull together the full interview. Hopefully you won't notice the various cuts in the recording. Here's Jessie. Regular listeners to the show will recall Dr. Lynn Savino. So when Lynn wrote to me and suggested I should interview Jessie Gehner, of course, I got in contact with Jessie. Hey, Jessie, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to be here.
Well, actually, Jessie, and you can't see this because this is not a video recording, but Jessie she's either got a huge back garden or she's in a forest somewhere because she's leaning up against a tree somewhere. And she told me she's left a 2-year-old inside, but fortunately with somebody, so that's a good thing. But we are joined by the cat, so we'll see how that goes. And by the way, why Twisted Sister? It's not a very doctory name, is it?
No, and I wasn't a doctor yet I've been Twisted Sister longer than I've been a doctor. Okay. So I love rock and roll music, and unfortunately my joints are very loose and prone to spraining and rolling. People would walk behind me and I'm practically walking on my ankles because I just roll my ankle and knees all the time. So that's how the name came about.
Oh, geez, that's not very nice, is it?
No.
Now, you're an ER doctor at, I believe, a trauma centre, and you teach wilderness first aid. And at first, I thought that was going to be the focus of our conversation because Lynn didn't tell me a great deal about you. That's only part of your story, a small part of your story, actually. Let's start with your AT thru hike, Sobo, in 2007. Had that been a bit of a dream for some time?
Oh, it had ever since I was a little girl, probably 9 or 10 years old when I first heard about the Appalachian Trail. And I had loved to camp out ever since I was tiny. My mom had let me camp out on our farm when I was about 4 years old by myself. And
gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder about that now that I have my own child, but it had been a dream for a long time. And then, when I finally got a chance to do it, my dad decided that he would come with me just for the first 10 days into the 100-mile wilderness to make sure his baby was safe. But fortunately, after about 3 days, he said, I've got to do the whole thing too. So it really was a dream. I am so very fortunate. It was the best decision I ever made. I mean, maybe besides marrying my husband and having my child, but it really is
good recovery there, by the way. Good recovery.
Yeah, right. But really one of the best decisions I ever made.
And did your father think that as well? Was he glad that he did it?
Oh, so glad. It was such a special time for us. He had been my hiking buddy, since I was a child, and we'd done several backpacking trips in the Smoky Mountains and, just around here locally in Kentucky and Virginia. And so that was kind of how we figured out what we were doing, but we still had a lot to learn when we got on our AT through
Of course.
hike. But of course, my first time backpacking, I took 4 pairs of jeans and, enough food to probably live out there a month. So,
Makeup?
it's a great
Did you take
paring
makeup
down
as well?
process.
Did you take
Yeah,
makeup as well?
no, yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. It's a funny
Hair
thing that
dryer, no.
the funny thing is, though, Jessie, people learn pretty quickly what they need and what they don't need. And it's actually it's more than about hiking, that part of it, the way you learn how little you actually need to fulfill your everyday job, isn't it? Or the things you want to do every day. And I think that's a great thing you get from the trail. Now,
Absolutely.
why Sobo?
So it was more of a timing issue. I had just finished my undergraduate work at Northern Kentucky University. I was a biology degree, and I had graduated in May, and I knew if I started in Georgia in May, I would have very little chance of making it to Mount Katahdin by the time they close the mountain. They usually kind of close the park, close the trail in October or whenever the first big snow comes. So I was, of course, hoping to do it all in one stretch in 1 year, and so that seemed like the best option.
That has never seemed like the best option to me, ever, ever, ever. All my listeners will know that the thought of using Katahdin as your approach trail is just absolutely anathema to me. I mean, so how tough is it then to start at Katahdin and get all the really difficult stuff out of the way early on? Did you find that kind of unsettling or not? Because it's a really tough cut. The
absolutely.
first couple of miles.
I really had no idea what I was getting into. The first day on Katahdin, I mean, we were just blown away. And we ended up, with very sore shins and legs by the time we came back down. And so I really don't recommend it, from, a health standpoint, because we didn't get much time to sort of acclimatize and get in shape. I feel like, Georgia's hard, but, I feel like you kind of get to, build yourself up a bit as you're heading north. And then heading straight into the 100-mile wilderness, we had 10 days worth of food with no resupply. And so that our packs were fairly heavy. I think my pack started out at about 40 pounds, which was way too heavy. And by the time we got to Monson, I unloaded a lot of stuff that I, realized I did not want to carry on my back. So
it's a great learning experience, no question. And do you feel that you got most of the highlights out of the way early on, or did you maintain that enthusiasm for the trail as you got past New Hampshire and Maine and so on?
It is, I never felt that way. There was absolutely beautiful scenery, beautiful mountains the whole way down up until our last day. And I loved Virginia so much that I ended up living there. I moved actually very close to the Appalachian Trail. And so I, as much as I love, the White Mountains and the Green Mountains and all of that, it's really beautiful. Every part has its own charm.
It's the wonderful variety of the trail, I think, which does give it its charm. You're right. And I kind of jokingly say that because I would always say I'm always going to go north if I'm ever going to do it. But, everybody I know has gone southbound. No one has ever regretted it as far as I know. So that's great. Yeah. Now, I know you mentioned you went with your father and he wanted to do the whole thing, but he got Lyme disease, didn't he?
He did, but actually he got Lyme disease much later. He got Lyme disease about, about 12 years later after we finished the trail. And that actually was while I was living in Virginia. We have a very high prevalence of Lyme disease. And so that was, fortunately, that was after our hike. We did a study a few years ago doing samples of deer ticks or Ixodes ticks in the area, and 1 in every 3 tested positive for Lyme disease, which
Good
I
Lord.
just think is alarming. So, when I see someone in the emergency department, if they have had an attached tick, certainly if they have any, neurologic symptoms or rash or anything like that, we're very aggressive with treating empirically. I will, if I pull a tick off of someone, even if they have no symptoms, I will give them a one-time dose of doxycycline to prevent infection.
Interesting. So you're preemptive as opposed to reactive.
Absolutely, because it does so much damage, and it really can get out of hand if it goes undetected.
So I had that wrong in my notes then. I thought your father got Lyme disease when he was on track, but he didn't. But in fact, something far worse happened and curtailed your hike, didn't it? So tell us what happened one day.
Yeah, so we had made it 1,500 miles from Katahdin. we'd been on the trail, gosh, about 3.5 months, and I fell and I broke my leg really badly. It was a silly injury. I wish I had a better story, that I was climbing some rock face, but I was walking along a flat stretch of ground. I caught my toe underneath a root, and with my foot fixed on the ground, my whole body fell, kind of forward, and it
Oh,
just snapped my leg. And it severed my ligaments on the sides of my knee. It was a really, really bad injury. I thought I was a Girl Scout and tried to splint it myself, and
oh,
tried to stand up
God.
with my trekking poles, and my leg just collapsed out to the side. It was really grisly.
Ugh.
So called 911. And the kind of serendipitous part of my whole story is extricated, and they took me to the hospital where I now practice. And I had
Ah,
not even started medical school. It was
that's
really a
funny.
kind of just a blessing in disguise, because then fast forward about 10 years, and I applied for residency there, applied for a job there, and of course had a great story. And
Yeah,
ultimately, myself and Dr. Stephanie LaRoe, who's my fellowship director, started a wilderness medicine program there, and that's where I work today, and that's where I do a lot of my teaching and a lot of my
yeah,
research. And so it really, really worked out quite well. But I was very devastated, at the time. And so I had to take 6 months off. I got
I bet.
intense physical therapy, got, a big surgical repair with a lot of hardware, a cadaver graft in my leg. And by the next April, I'd fallen in October. 6 months later in April, I was back on the trail with a big knee
Oh,
brace, and we were doing very low miles to start. But by the time we made it, we had 800 more miles to do, and by the time I made it to Springer, I was fully rehabbed.
good Lord.
Yeah.
Did the act of hiking itself assist in your rehab, do you think?
100%. I think it was the perfect physical therapy, because it was kind of forced. Of course we took 0 days. Of course we rested, but
Sure.
I was forced to put on my pack and walk every day, even if it was for shorter distances than I was used to. By the time when I injured myself on the first leg of our trip, we were up to doing 20, 25 miles a day.
Sure, sure.
When I came back, we were, somewhere between 5 and 8 starting out, but pretty quickly I got strong again, and we were back to our 20-mile days again.
What a wonderful experience for you and your dad to share with you and your dad. So the fact that you were about to be able to share it with somebody you love must have been very special for both of you, and as a father, particularly special for him, I suspect, as well.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah, I bet he talks about it all the time as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, there's almost not a day goes by that we don't bring up some story from the trail or make
Of
some
course,
reference to it. It's a
of
very
course.
special time.
I'd like to go back though for a second to the extrication from the trail. You said you called 911. Were you close to? I mean, what happened? Were you close to the road or what?
Fortunately, I was. I was probably less than a mile from a road crossing,
Wow.
and what they did is they drove a Gator, a all-terrain vehicle, about as close as they could get to me, and then they loaded me up in what's called a Stokes basket, which is just a fancy stretcher with sides.
Right,
And
right.
carried me to the Gator, and then it was a very bumpy, painful ride out to the ambulance.
I bet.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's really great though, because the same rescue team that got me, I still interact with today. They bring me patients at Roanoke Memorial, and it's such a twist of fate, really. Um,
Yeah, it really is. Now, we're going to turn to your hiking again later, but now I wanted to focus on the wilderness medicine part of your story. What was
yeah.
your main motivation to address that issue or to get involved in that issue?
Yeah. So the injury, the injury itself, me breaking my leg, was a huge, huge motivator. Made me look into search and rescue, made me look into wilderness medicine.
Yeah.
And once I found out that this was a field, I decided this, whatever way I can get into this field, this is what I want to do. This is the way I'll be happy in medicine. And it seemed that emergency medicine was the most direct route to that, because essentially with wilderness medicine, we're practicing emergency medicine in the backcountry with very
Right.
limited resources.
Right.
And so I did an emergency medicine residency, and then a year-long fellowship after that, to specialize in wilderness medicine. So it was,
Okay.
my dreams came true.
So how do you go about it? I mean, did you put the course together, or was there something that existed already? I mean, what you can't, you can say this is what I want to do. Do you become part of a program, or do you actually design the program yourself?
So I designed the program myself, of course, with a lot of help from the folks at Virginia Tech and a lot of support from them. I am part of the Wilderness Medical Society, and they do these programs called Adventure CMEs, which is continuing medical education. So people that take these courses can get credit. And
Right.
a lot of, it's a requirement for a lot of practitioners that they get this continuing medical education. So this is a very fun way to do it. And I just, I thought there was a need that, you know, providers need to know sort of the struggles that long distance hikers go through. And really, when they spend 4 days on the trail, and I feel like they get to learn about a lot of those struggles firsthand, fortunately or unfortunately. And so
Yeah.
I wanted it to be experiential learning. You can only learn so much from a classroom. When you're out there stomping around in wet boots and socks and you're getting blisters and your knees are hurting and, all these things are going on, you're getting cold because you're wet. I think you learn a lot more and, remember what you're learning.
And you're obviously passionate about this because you, as I understand it, you did classes at Trail Days as well. Is that right? You went to
Yeah,
Trail Days?
yeah, yeah. I did.
So what form did they take and how were they received by people?
So it was more of a workshop, and through hikers and former hikers alike joined. I did a presentation and then sort of showed them what all's in my first aid kit. Showed them some basic like splinting techniques, wound care techniques, foot care techniques, and so it was part lecture, part hands on. But I really am, education is my passion as much as medicine is, and I think
Right.
that's from lay people that have no medical training all the way to people that are specialized in wilderness medicine. I really love to teach kind of the full spectrum.
So when you're the course that Dr. Lynn went on was your one, I think, you did the Virginia Triple Crown, didn't you? And
Yes.
yeah, with the thing that sticks in my mind was the woman with the stick in her eye, which
Oh
is
yeah. Oh, she
yeah.
must have showed you the picture. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, not at all nice. No, I didn't like that at all. But who signs up for your courses? Is it just doctors, or is it doctors and hikers? In other words, can anybody sign up for that course?
So that course specifically is through the Wilderness Medical Society. So it's primarily doctors,
Mm,
nurses, physicians
yeah,
assistants, nurse practitioners. But we've had spouses come along who have no medical training, or we're happy to invite other people that don't have medical training on these trips. So it really is open to almost everybody, but usually it's primarily healthcare providers.
right. Okay. So, and you mentioned earlier on, this is for CE credits as well, and what a great way to get CE credits. But do
Oh
some of them
yeah.
really? But do some of them really get into the hiking element of it? In other words, do you sort of convert people to hikers?
I think I have. There's been several. We've been doing this course now since 2018, and so I have several of the students. It was their very first backpacking trip, and I stay in touch with a
Wow.
lot of the students, and they've gone on to do other hikes, and so I feel like we did spark a passion in some people.
Nice, nice. And how do you prepare people for the course? Because it isn't straightforward for somebody to go out. Say, well, we're going on a hike tomorrow for 3 or 4 days, 5 days. So
Right.
how do you prepare? How do you prepare them for it?
So there's a great deal of emails and sometimes some Zoom meetings to kind of prepare them for what to expect.
Yeah,
And I give them a training regimen. I really am heavy on instructing people. The only way to prepare for backpacking is to get out and hike up and down hills with a heavy pack on your back.
oh yeah,
Because we've had runners, we've had weightlifters, we've had all these extraordinary athletes, but if they didn't get out and hike with their pack, it almost doesn't matter how fit you are. You're going to struggle if you haven't had that experience. So I give them some training tips. Of course, I give them a gear list. I instruct them on, what sorts of foods are good to bring, tell them not to bring canned goods or, try to not carry any water in their food. And the biggest thing is I do have a weight limit for their packs. I don't like anybody to carry more than 40 pounds. And really, it's
Hmm.
best if they can be under 35.
Sure, sure. And do they follow your instructions? Because it's a real shock when you go out on a trail first off anyway. And if you're really unprepared, it can really take some people by surprise, I'm sure. How do they tend to cope with it, the ones who've never hiked before?
There's been a few tears. There's been, we've had to offload a couple people, kind of share some of their gear so their pack is not as heavy.
Sure.
Prior to making the weight restriction, I had a couple guys who their packs I know were approaching 60 pounds. And it's just not sustainable. It just makes the trip miserable. And so that was part of the reason that I made that restriction. It's not been 100% success rate every time. There's been just a handful of people that have had to stop their hike early. Fortunately, the Triple Crown is very accessible, so it was easy for these people to get off the trail and get back home. But really, I feel like the success rate has been pretty great. Probably since 2018, we've maybe had 3 or 4 people that haven't made the entire hike. So
wow, that's impressive, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, funny enough, when I recorded Dr. Lynn talking about the event that she did and went on the Triple Crown and so on, it's inspired me to go and do the Triple Crown in March next year. Because I'm going to be out there
wonderful
for about 4 days as a shakedown for my hike in the UK about a few weeks later. Now, when we spoke previously, and I haven't actually checked with you on this, whether you've done this or not, we talked about you giving us a kind of top 10 of tips, medicine type tips. Are you up for that? Have you got some things you can tell us about the things people should look for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, these are medical tips to a point. They're also just kind of general hiking tips. But, the reason
Sure.
I'm sort of focusing on these things are because I feel like it prevents injury and illness. And
Sure.
that's, of course, what we want to do.
Absolutely.
At the top of that list would be having your pack be as light as possible. I always tell people you can either be happy while you're hiking or you can be happy at camp. And you kind of have to find that balance of how much comfort you want and how happy you'd like to be during the day while you're on your feet. And, with backpacking, most of your time is spent walking. So, really just eliminating any extras, especially when it's rainy. It's best to just have one set of hiking clothes that you're in every day and they become disgusting and wet. But having multiple changes of clothes is not helpful. So really just minimizing your pack weight is going to make your hike more enjoyable. It's going to prevent injury. I
Sure.
do some research on thru-hikers, and I definitely have seen a correlation between pack weight and number of injuries. So going lightweight is definitely at the top of that. Probably second is listen to your body. A lot of times people that want to do backpacking and hiking are very competitive. They're athletes, they love to push themselves, which certainly is necessary, but it's never beneficial to push through an injury or push through severe pain. It's not going to get better.
Sure.
And it may prevent future hikes from happening. So, listen to your body. If you just aren't able to continue on, if you're having severe pain somewhere, stop your hike, try to get out and you'll have a chance to come back hopefully. And it's not worth it to push through a lot of pain and turn a minor injury into a major one.
But don't you feel though that and people have heard me say this before, that I found on the trail something was hurting all the time, literally all the time. But
absolutely.
It didn't last because something hurt somewhere else the next day, worse.
Yes, that is so true.
But that thing about getting something, fighting through particularly strong pain, I totally buy into. Yeah, you need to stop when you can, don't you? Really, and then give yourself a break, basically.
Right. And that's a good point is, if you've got aches and pains, stop where you're at and take a short rest. A lot of times you'll find if you stop and stretch and take your pack off for a bit, get a little something to eat, maybe take an anti-inflammatory, that, when you start back, the pain's not as bad.
Sure.
But if you have pain that is altering your gait, if you are not walking properly, if you're having to limp, if you're having to, somehow struggle and, aren't keeping your typical gait, it's probably time to consider getting off the trail for this trip.
Yeah. Okay. Any more?
So I kind of mentioned this early, just really briefly, and this goes back to lightweight. Don't carry water in your food. try to go for very nutrient dense, high fat, high protein foods that are dehydrated or freeze dried in some way. One of my favorites that I think provides a pretty big nutritional boost that we ate on our thru hike was the oatmeal with protein powder in it, ground up flaxseed, lots of nuts and dried fruit, and sometimes some peanut butter mixed in. So, the most, and I know it sounds delicious. And, the crazy thing is I still eat that for breakfast almost every day. I never got tired of it. But, fats are going to be your most, calorie dense, source of nutrition. And of course, especially when you're on a long hike, you're going to have to really get a lot of protein to rebuild all the damage that you're doing every day. So,
hang on. Let's talk about protein for a second. When should you eat protein? Because I was told, this may be complete bullshit, but I was told that it's better to eat protein once you've finished the actual hike and in the evening to eat it. Is that right?
Yeah.
What's the physiological reason for that then?
So, carbohydrates are going to be your source of energy for climbing, for, keeping your energy levels up. That's your immediate source. But protein, I think it's important to have a heavy protein meal at the end of the day, but you also want fat and protein in your diet earlier in the day because it kind of helps you have a more steady blood sugar. That way you don't get kind of spikes and valleys where, if you eat something really sugary and then it wears off and then you kind of crash.
Sure.
If you've got fat and protein along with that sugar, it's going to have a lot more steady effect on you and maintain your energy levels a little bit higher.
Right.
Certainly want a lot of protein at the end of the day, to kind of rebuild the damage that you've done. But timing of protein isn't just terribly important. But what is carbohydrates. And I've run into a couple, particularly young ladies that are maybe trying to diet or, lose weight and hiking is a way that they're doing that, going on these keto diets where there are no carbohydrates. And that it's doable, but I feel like it is not probably the best way to hike. I feel like a lot of times these people will kind of crash and their energy levels will go way down because at a certain point you need carbohydrates. Yeah.
Well, interestingly, we had a young woman on the show. Funny enough, her name was Jessie as well. A long time ago, she believes she's the one and only at the time person to do a thru hike of the PCT fully on a keto diet. And
really?
she felt she had more energy at the end of the day than anybody. She actually felt she got stronger as the day went on.
Wow. And if your body is used to being in ketosis, you can, kind of convert over to that fat metabolism and, and maintain your energy levels after that point. But there does come a certain point where I feel like you start wasting muscle.
Okay.
And that's just a personal opinion, kind of from how I feel like my physiology works, because I've tried various diets over the years. I've been a long-term athlete. I ran cross country in college and, so I've tried a lot of the different ones. I don't think there's a one size fits all. And I find that real. I would love to talk to her sometime and kind of see what her diet specifically was like and kind of,
I'll connect the two of you. I'll send you both an email. Yeah, I'll send both of you
that's
an
interesting because
email.
I'm always open to learning more from other people's experience.
Cool. And any other tips that you want to share with us?
Yeah. So I always encourage people from a safety standpoint to not rely on their electronics, because inevitably you will lose battery power, particularly in cold environments, like when I go to Nepal. Things get broken, things get wet. People that rely just on GPS and don't know how to read a paper map are really putting themselves in a bad situation if their GPS would fail them. So I always encourage people to know how to read a paper map, know how to orienteer before they go out. I think that's probably, along with that, always expect the worst weather possible on your hike and be prepared to
'Cause you'll get
prevent
it.
hypothermia. Because you will.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly,
Sooner or
yeah.
later, you're going to have terrible, terrible weather.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can get hypothermia in the mountains absolutely any month of the year. We were in the White Mountains in July, and there was a 14-degree wind chill, and ice on the rocks. So, always be prepared to have, a good, what we call a vapor barrier or a windbreak, some sort of waterproof outer shell, and some sort of insulating layer, even if it's summer.
Okay. Well, look, I'm going to move on now to your hiking, because you just mentioned Nepal as well. Tell everybody what you've been doing for the last few years with students.
Yeah. So I am so lucky in that I get to go to Everest Base Camp every year and take medical students, residents, fellows, even some paramedic students, and we trek to Everest Base Camp. And I feel like it's a
Wow.
neat program. We go there and first of all, we will do some training for trekking guides in Kathmandu, the same trekking guides that go up to the top of Mount Everest. We'll do some wilderness first aid training for them. And we also do sort of a wilderness medicine day at the medical school in Kathmandu for medical students. So we kind of start out this trip sort of teaching heavy to sort of do some wilderness medicine training for folks. And then we start our trek to Everest Base Camp. And along the way, there are several clinics that we visit. Several small hospitals and clinics, including the one that Sir Edmund Hillary started in Kunde. And then kind of the final stop is Everest ER, which is essentially a barrack-style tent that's at Everest Base Camp, right at the bottom of the Khumbu Icefall. And we talk about cases with the doctors that work there. We do some journal clubs. We get to actually see some patients and see some really good pathology while we're up there. And so I just have fallen in love with that place, so much so that my husband and I got married at Everest Base Camp. Now we have a little boy whose name is Everest. And we are just all in when it comes to that area. And so looking forward to going back this April.
So can you talk specifically there about altitude?
So my area of research is acute mountain sickness or altitude sickness.
Right.
And I've done a couple studies looking at the effect of ibuprofen in preventing acute mountain sickness. And I've had it myself. I've seen a lot of people with it. And so if you're looking for tips to prevent acute mountain sickness, I think at the top of the list is taking a very gentle ascent profile. You don't want to increase your sleeping elevation by more than 500 meters each night. And if you do, you need to take what's called an acclimatization day, or essentially a 0 day, where you don't increase your sleeping elevation. This allows your body to, kind of catch up, continue to acclimatize, and get used to the altitude.
That's where you sleep. So you can go up over a pass. I'm thinking John Muir Trail, which I know you've done as well. You go over the pass and then down again and sleep at a lower level. And then the next day you can go up higher, but then go down again so you're about 500 meters above where you were before. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. And
which is about 1,500 feet. It's about 1,600 feet, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep.
Okay.
For the non-metric folks. So it's, we kind of say climb high, sleep low. So, when you're planning your hikes at high altitude and you're picking, your camping locations, if you have the option to camp at a slightly lower elevation, definitely do it. Even though it may not be as spectacular of a view, it's going to be better for your physiology. There are.
What about medicine?
Oh, sorry.
I took acetazolamide. I think it was acetazolamide.
Yes.
Like yeah. What else is there?
So that's kind of the first line medication. For people that can't take acetazolamide, there are some other options. I particularly looked at ibuprofen. Which sort of prevents the inflammation that comes along with acute mountain sickness. Not as effective as acetazolamide, but there are certain people that cannot take acetazolamide. Then steroids are also an option, not a great option because that's a medicine that we use to treat high altitude cerebral edema. And we want to sort of reserve those medications to be effective if someone would get high altitude cerebral edema, and they're not as effective if you've already been on them.
Wow.
And then there's, the local people have all sorts of remedies that they think helps with altitude sickness. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of science to back it up, but I am a believer. I think these people know what they're doing. They've lived
Oh,
up
yeah.
there for centuries.
Yeah. Yeah.
The people in South America swear by coca leaves and coca tea. The people in Nepal are very heavy on garlic soup and ginger tea. The garlic soup reportedly has some anti-inflammatory properties. The ginger tea is great for the nausea that's associated with altitude sickness. And, both of them are hydrating, which hydration is, kind of one of the key elements of
Absolutely.
helping yourself acclimatize.
Yeah. Well,
And
I
so,
eventually got to Whitney last year, having failed to do the John Muir Trail 3 times. And I think it was I was sent some, he said it was military strength or military grade, what's the word, electrolytes. And
nice.
I gave up booze for 4 months before I went on my trip, because I
Wow.
thought that would help, which is
Yeah.
pretty keen. Got to admit, that's quite impressive to do that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm very impressed. Yeah.
So I'm always interested in it, but I eventually got there, and I think it was because we went up and then we slept low every time we went up, then we slept low again. So I'm really pleased about that. Well, look, have you got any plans for a quieter life now you've got a 2-year-old, or you got any more adventures coming up?
Oh, I hope I have lots more adventures coming up. Like I said, we're going back to Nepal for almost a month, coming up in April. My husband always comes with me on this trek. He's a very
Right.
big help to me.
Nice.
He's a EMT. He also helps me teach.
Right.
And fortunately, I have parents that are willing to keep a crazy 2-year-old for a month. So I have a great support team. I couldn't do it without them. I hope that maybe someday my son will want to do a through hike of the Appalachian Trail with me.
That'd
He
be
already
cool.
loves to hike. One of his first words was backpack. I had a little Osprey baby pack that I've carried him around in since he could hold his head up.
Very
And
nice.
so I'm hoping he'll be my adventure buddy. And I have no intentions of slowing down anytime soon.
Good for you. Good for you. I mean, you're exhausting.
Oh, shoot. Yeah. Well, some people say that.
all the things you do. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I really appreciate. Firstly, I appreciate Lynn putting me on to you. Secondly, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And thirdly, I'm going to connect you with the other Jessie as well, and see if you can learn how she got on with it, because she looked great when she finished. So
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
and she felt great as well. So anyway, I appreciate you coming on, and hopefully you got some more adventures in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute pleasure. I love to talk about hiking, so anytime you want me to talk about a different subject, I can talk your ear off about it. And I
That's very
appreciate
cool.
you for having me.
Thanks a lot. Cheers then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
As I said, so much more to Jessie than the wilderness first aid. I mean, that would have been enough, but Everest Base Camp? Come on. How awesome to be doing something you love in a setting that exhilarates you. I hope we all took something away from that conversation, whether it was first aid in general or the effects of ibuprofen on altitude sickness. I bet my friend Lynn had a chuckle when Jessie mentioned ibuprofen, as she has lectured me on overuse of vitamin I several times on the show. Jessie sent me a few really interesting links, so I hope you check them out in the show notes. Thanks as ever goes to our wonderful donors, with monthly donors this week being Michael Garsh, Betty McEnany, Anne Pickin, Sean Deadwiley, Sharon James, Kevin Weidman, Emmanuel Bravaramas and Brian Alsop. While we also got donations from Bill Sheehy and Connor Mulligan from Ireland, who wrote, "Keep on going on." My thoughts precisely, Connor. Thanks to all of you who've taken the time and spent the cash to show their appreciation for what we do here at the network. It is very much appreciated. Now, let's catch up with an extraordinarily colourful Jessica Lang-Wright. Here she is. Well, to finish off the Mighty Blue Class of 2023, we've got Jessica Lang-Wright again. Hey, Jessica, how are you?
Doing all right. How are you, Steve?
I'm good. And you are looking particularly resplendent with your incredibly blue hair. You've got even bluer by the looks of things.
I went full bluebird when I got done. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So, as a kind of I know what it's like when you finish the trail. Well, I know what it's like when I finish the trail. You have all sorts of thoughts and emotions and so on. I know yours was a particularly long hike. How are you feeling 2 months after it's all over?
I kind of wish we could have this conversation another 2 months out. I think there's a lot to still be processed, for sure.
I agree. I must admit, in 2019, I thought I think by 2019 I'd processed the 2014 hike, but it took me a long time to do the 2019 one, and I'm not sure I've really sort of kind of got over that 5 years later as well. But did you get any post-trail depression, or the sort of thing that people tend to get?
I would say I'm still in it, for sure.
Oh, really? Well, you're missing the trail. You can't possibly be missing the trail. You were on it long enough to have got used to it.
I don't know that I'm so much missing the trail as missing the people and the way of life. Those are the kind of the main things.
So what's your way of life now then? What are you doing?
Well, I mean, I was telling somebody this the other day. It used to be that I had one pot and a spoon and I could get along just fine. And now I need all of this stuff to survive.
Yes.
A little overwhelming.
Yeah, stuff is overwhelming. But weren't you working back at the hostel you were at before?
Yeah, so I'm at the Notch Hostel in North Woodstock, New Hampshire. Started here December 31st.
A few days after you finished?
Yep.
All right. So the date you actually finished, was it 23rd or 24th of December, something like that?
December 23rd, yeah.
Has the high of finishing gone away, or do you still think back to that moment? Because it was a pretty epic finish, and our friend Hugh providing a stand, which is pretty darn great. Has the high gone down?
I guess it has. I've kind of started to settle into the day-to-day routine, such as it is at this point. Sometimes I really have to look back at the pictures and the videos and everything I took just to even believe it happened.
Yes. Isn't that funny? I hadn't thought about that till you said that. You do, don't you? You think, you kind of look back at the picture and say, was that me? Was I up there? Could I see that fantastic view? Because you're now back in mainstream life, aren't you? Really, paying bills and earning money and the sort of things that most people do. Has it been a hard adjustment to get back to it, or the fact that you went to a hostel, did that help?
The hostel definitely helps, but yeah, I think it is a tough transition. My life is completely different than when I started the trail. I think a lot of people come to the trail after something has changed their lives or intending to make a change. And I certainly knew that I needed to make some changes, but I didn't quite expect it to be as dramatic as it's been. So.
And how you cope with the drama of it all then? Because, like life, most of our dramas happen normally when we're younger. And you're not a kid anymore. You're not old like me, but you wouldn't have expected so much drama, I guess, at this stage. How do you cope with that? Or is it something that you think you've learned stuff on the trail that inures you against some of the problems?
I think the trail definitely helped. I mean, that whole lesson of just one step at a time. Like, there's only so many things you can do in one day, and you just have to take one step at a time and eat that elephant one bite at a time. That's certainly helped. I think one of the biggest things that I definitely learned out there was that you need other people. And so I've been really trying to be very intentional about talking to my friends on a regular basis and connecting with people that I didn't get to connect with very much while I was on the trail, because I never knew where I was going to be on a given day.
Sure.
At least now I can say, hey, you want to talk at like 8:00 on Monday night? That sort of thing.
It's good. It's funny if you do. I mean, you particularly, you when I met you actually on the trail was in Damascus, I think it was, for the first time.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, of all the people who are out there, and I thought, I don't know how much longer she's going to be going, but you just kept on plugging away. And I met you obviously with Mike. You obviously spoken to Mike since you've come back and so on. How's he adjusting back to life on the trail?
He's doing pretty well.
Off the trail, rather.
Yeah, he's doing pretty well. He's got a really nice apartment, and he's still figuring things out, but he's doing well.
So did this make you want to do something like this again, or do you think this is something that you probably won't do again?
I think that's really hard to say at this stage of things for me. There's still a lot that's still being unfolded for me right now in my kind of day-to-day life. So I'm not really sure. I don't know that I have another 2,000 miler in me, but I definitely,
Another
I would
10-monther.
yeah,
Another 10-monther.
yeah. I mean, I would love to do something like the Colorado Trail. I would love to do the Camino de Santiago. I'd love to see the national parks. That's kind of one of the bucket list things at this point. So it's really hard for me to say at this point.
Yeah, keep ticking off the bucket list items. I saw on Facebook that you had, because, the algorithm feeds us different feeds from different people. You're one of the ones I get all your feeds, I think, because I obviously click into it and so on. You got your certificate. I know we don't do this for certificate. There's something kind of special about it, don't you think?
Definitely. And I was really hoping that when I got that, it would be one of the things that would make it real for me, that seeing my name and my trail name in print on a piece of paper would do that. And it still doesn't feel real. It's amazing.
So let's go back. Let's talk. What date did you actually start?
I started March 10th, my 45th birthday.
March the 10th. Okay.
Yep.
So you were out on the trail and you had some tough times relatively quickly. When you look back on it, are there a couple of highlights? And give me a low light. Give me one of your first low lights. How was it? Because I know was that the hypothermia?
Yeah.
Was that one of your little highlights or lowlights?
A low light, yeah. My first day in the Smokies, getting hypothermia was definitely my low light, for sure.
And at that point, when because everybody crowded around you, which I'm sure gave you that feeling of community, which I know meant a lot to you at the time, and it's kind of stayed with you as time went on. How did you feel the next morning? Did you think to yourself, "I really put myself in danger there," or what was your thought process?
Yeah, I mean, that's what in some of the ways. I feel kind of weird saying it was a low light because it was a pivotal moment in not just my hike but also my life. Really, I think the next morning, I think it was mostly just shock. By the time I woke up, most of the people were gone and on their way, and I didn't even get a chance to really thank the woman that had helped me the most. I got that opportunity later on at Madison Hut in New Hampshire.
I know you did. Amazing.
It's one of the pictures that I cherish the most, for sure, seeing her again. Yeah, I think it was mostly just I screwed up pretty bad, and what am I going to do now? And Clingman's Dome is still 4 days away. Am I going forward or am I not? And I didn't get very far that day, but I ended up moving forward.
And I know you always said you were a very slow hiker, and I suppose taking the time you took, I guess, speaks to that as well. When you're obviously pretty much beaten up when you finish. How do you feel physically now?
Well, unfortunately, I've been under the weather for about the last week and a half.
God.
So that's been interesting. I'm really looking forward to getting the feeling back in my toes. That would be nice. I know most people that finish in September, October talk about having Christmas toes. So I'm hoping I have birthday toes because that's about the same time frame from when I finished.
So the physicality, you get the feeling back in your toes. I found I couldn't run upstairs for about 6 months afterwards. Not that I particularly needed to run upstairs anywhere, but it was one of those things that there's certain things that stick with you for quite a while on a trail, and it kind of hurts you quite a bit. That feeling of well-being I had going through the whites, and the feeling of well-being I had going, basically all of New Hampshire and Maine. That kind of, as soon as I stopped, that the feeling of stopping really almost froze me up, my legs and stuff like that. Did you get that? Are you walking again, for example? You done any hikes since?
I've done 2 hikes here in the Whites. I had a couple of friends ask me if I wanted to go out, and at first I didn't think I should because I figured like I really needed to rest and whatnot. And I did rest for a few weeks. I mean, besides going back to work right away and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But I also felt like I really just needed to get out there. And I did 2, what around here we would call smaller winter hikes. And honestly, it just felt so good. Like I used the same backpack that I used for the AT for winter hiking around here because it carries my snowshoes well and all of that. And it felt really good to get this kind of familiar feeling of my pack on my back. And even though the gear was different and whatnot, although we did kind of laugh because the first hike I did, I went out and the blazes were yellow because it wasn't the AT. And I was like, what are those things on the tree?
Yeah.
Like, that's just
Yeah,
weird.
Yeah.
I took one picture of me pointing at them like, what is that? So after following white blazes for the better portion of a year, that was strange. But that familiar feeling of a pack on my back, it was good. And
the action of walking with poles, don't you find that quite a comforting thing as well?
yeah.
And because I would get into the stride and I kind of felt, especially second time round, I knew exactly what I was doing. You know, I didn't know what I was doing first time, but second time I knew exactly where I was. I knew exactly what I was doing. And I felt very comfortable getting into that motion straight away.
Yeah, I really missed it. And like I said, I've only been out twice really. And I'm looking forward to feeling well enough to get back out there for sure.
So the meeting the woman who helped you in the Smokies was obviously a high moment. Is there another particularly special moment you recall and you're always going to look back and smile at that you think that was pretty damn special? Apart from meeting me in Damascus, of course.
There was a moment in the Roanoke Highlands and I was just up there and it was an area that I was familiar with. I had day hiked in that area on the AT before, but I got to see it in a very different way on my thru hike. And
in what way? In what way, Jessica?
Part of it was there's this area called Grandfather Mountain that you can see from the Roanoke Highlands.
That's right.
That I had been on Grandfather Mountain. I had heard of Grandfather Mountain because I had vacationed in that area multiple times. I had never seen the profile like I did when I was thru hiking, where you can actually see the face and, you know, see the head and the nose and all this that they talk about. And just being able to see it from that perspective, it was like, and to be on a thru hike instead of a day hike. You know,
you've earned the view.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something about, and I was kind of laughing about this with my friends when we went day hiking a few weeks ago, like it was weird in the beginning to only go in one direction, to not have to turn around at the end of the day. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And then like, now I come back here and I'm like, wait, we have to turn around. Like, you know, I got used to going in one direction. So it was a very different perspective. And there was a feeling of freedom in that moment that was very different for me.
And that feeling, I don't think it ever goes away. You know, I've still got parts of my hike that in my mind give me the freedom I think I've yearned for a long time in my life, and it hit me hard very often. You know, things like what you just said, a view that you've earned by walking up a hill. You can see something you've seen from a different angle, but it's all it's you having had to walk there to get that view. It's a very special feeling, I think, to get those things. And it's something that's, I can think back now, I can still see, for example, just going across the bridge, Abel Bridge, to see Katahdin. I can see exactly as it looked that day. You know, it's a special thing because I know I just walked 100 miles through the bloody wilderness to get to the Golden Road and Abel Bridge, and to see Katahdin off the road was just something that's just going to stay with me forever. I'm sure it will you as well. Well, look, you know, I'm glad we're at last finishing up the class of 2023. We don't have a class in 2024 yet, but in fact, I don't think we're actually going to do that this year. But you know, you were the one who gave me the most concern the whole time, and yet you were the one who came through and you finished it. So I was so pleased we could follow you, and I'm really glad that you're looking well now, and particularly blue, as I said. All right, but thanks for coming back on and sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
She was quite, diffident to start with, and I can almost see that she was still processing her hike. When you spend so much time out there, it can't fail to impact you in a big way. She had more than enough trauma and drama to fill a dozen hikes, but she still got there. I've included a picture from our conversation that I took as we were speaking. Check out that blue hair in the show notes. It looks great. So that's it for another week. I'm closing in on my own Virginia Triple Crown, and I'll be going with about 6 friends. We head out in the last week of March, so I'll get a good shakedown before I leave for the UK and the Southwest Coast Path a few weeks later. It's going to be awesome. I'll see you next week.